Good morning. Thank you for being here so bright and early. Some of you in this room have a crazy idea. That is, that students can change the world. In fact, most of you may have this idea, and many of you have invested your personal and professional energies in this notion. And you get up every morning determined to make that happen, to make progress toward this crazy, preposterous idea. Stephen Foster Black, our keynote speaker this morning, shares this idea with you. You might say that Stephen Black is the personification of engaged learning, of that powerful idea that learners, scholars, and communities, armed with a shared purpose, can and do change the world. What an honor for us to spend the morning with him. Stephen Black is the grandson of the United States Supreme Court Justice Hugo L. Black. He grew up in New Mexico after most of his family left our city in the 1950s and 60s, following his grandfather's controversial role in civil rights decisions, including Brown versus the Board of Education. Despite growing up over 1,000 miles from here, from a very early age, Stephen has always been connected to Alabama through the legacy of his family's commitment to public service. Stephen Black received his bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania, where he graduated magna cum laude, and his Juris Doctorate from Yale Law School. Following graduation from law school, he returned to Alabama to join a Birmingham law firm. After 3 years with that firm, he was called to public service, serving for a brief time as assistant to the governor of Alabama, focusing on policy and economic development. And during his experience in the governor's office, Stephen was captured by the enthusiasm of the thousands of students he encountered when he was speaking around the state. And so then Stephen Black came to the University of Alabama and convinced the president and provost to create the Center for Ethics and Social Responsibility. And a related statewide organization also housed at the center called Impact Alabama. Through the work of the center, students are supported in developing a personal definition of moral and civic maturity. The center is dedicated to making the values and skills of citizenship a hallmark of a University of Alabama education through authentic experiences in communities that, as Ambassador Joseph framed for us yesterday, make the conditions of others our own. Impact Alabama is a statewide service learning effort, unique nationally, a nonprofit staffed by 30 full-time college graduates who then have provided more than 3,000 college students with opportunities to participate in structured service learning projects that promote learning and leadership development. Since the center and Impact Alabama began, students and staff have provided more than 3,600 hours of service to the Tuscaloosa Pre-K initiative. Through the Documenting Justice initiative, written and produced films focused on subjects of social justice of both state and international significance, provided advanced placement for high school students throughout the state of Alabama, prepared tax returns for more than 17,000 working families, claiming $31 million in refunds and saving approximately $4.7 million in commercial preparation fees. Provided comprehensive vision care to more than 155,000 children. In 2008, Black received the prestigious Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Community Health Leaders Award for his work with Focus First. This national award is given annually to individuals who demonstrate creativity and commitment in addressing society's most pressing health issues. 10 recipients were chosen from among 800 nominations. The Birmingham News says of Stephen Black, Black is bright and energetic and he speaks persuasively on such broad issues as tax, constitution, and education reform. Black exhibits a new spirit of leadership that Alabama desperately needs. And from the Tuscaloosa News, Stephen Black could be the template for what people envision when they talk about the best and brightest. Energetic, brilliant, articulate, Black is the brightest hope for the future in Alabama. What I predict you will say about Stephen Black is, wow, amen. Dear colleagues, it's my great honor to present Stephen Foster Black.
Thank you, and what an incredible introduction. That sets the bar way too high. Have you been hearing the news releases from both presidential campaigns? They're all so worried about underperforming. They're each acting as if they're going to be lucky to make it through with complete sentences. That's the way I feel after that introduction. I will say, do you all sort of see, it's kind of funny how incredibly well educated this room is, and no matter how far along we move through our educated life, you all avoid the front row like a group of third graders. Why does that happen? Still, this is what I want to do with this short period of time, and I'm going to talk fast because I've got a lot to say to you all before my time is up. I think, at the risk of saying things that we all know, I still think it's worthwhile to step back every once in a while and go back to the reason why any of us do any kind of work tied with universities relating to communities. There's so many talented and educated people in the room that I think there's a risk that we get so enthralled and develop such an expertise and focus on one specific area that I don't think it's a bad idea every once in a while to lift our heads up and stand back and breathe deeply and acknowledge again why the overarching reason for all of this is so fundamentally important. And I would suggest to you the reason for colleges to care about citizenship, for universities to have it matter to them that they're entrusted with the lives of young human beings who are growing into adults with either a moral and ethically engaged life in front of them or not. I don't think there's ever been a time where there's a greater call on universities and us as members of university communities and community partners who partner with universities to be thoughtful about the picture we find ourselves in. When I say the picture we find ourselves in, I would argue to you all, we face a bigger challenge right now in regards to the future of ethical, engaged citizenship than at any time in our country's past. Literally, I mean that. I think the biggest single challenge confronting ethical progress, and let me be clear, because I know there are a lot of academics in the room. I'm defining progress in as general a way that everyone can agree on the definition, meaning a non-ideological definition. The idea, as corny as it sounds, a conception from our founders, the idea of an America, a country worth dying for, that gives you the right and the liberty and the privilege of caring about your children, working hard in your avocation, having some sense of commitment to your community, and based on those ingredients, having a rational expectation that your children will realize a better life than you, and your grandchildren a better life than them. And that has, in fact, been what I refer to as the transcendent trajectory of progress of our nation. This incredible experiment in democracy, as messy as it is, and freedom and justice. I think the biggest fundamental challenge to ever come before us is here right now, live and in living color in a way we've never seen before. A bigger threat than terrorism, a bigger threat than another banking crisis, although that would be bad. A bigger threat than a double-dip recession. I shouldn't have said that. Bigger than that, I think, is fundamentally what happens to a nation of citizens who 5-year increments you can measure year after year after year become less and less personally engaged with people unlike themselves. Sort of Robert Putnam moving forward, a whole body of scholarship and concern over what happens in an increasingly competitive world economy where more Americans and All kinds of Americans are working longer than they ever have before, at least trying to find the hours to work longer than ever before. And when you couple that with the demographic changes, which I still think the majority of Americans don't have any sense of the challenges to citizenship that comes with becoming a majority suburban nation. 15 years ago marked that point for us, the first time in our history a majority of us now live in the suburbs, which technically speaking means what else have we added on to our daily burden in addition to longer work hours for average Americans than ever before? Commuting. The drive goes up. There are some jobs in the suburbs, but the majority of them are not. The majority of Americans suburbanizing further and further out to realize their understanding of the American dream by buying a home with a lawn and some trees puts them on the highway more and more hours every year. There were articles written 15 years ago focusing on Atlanta as the longest average daily highway commute in the Western world, and it was referred to as the revolt of the commuters. These beautiful loft projects coming up in downtown Atlanta. We've got some great ones in Birmingham. There's some cool loft projects downtown Tuscaloosa. Beautiful story, statistically an anomaly. We continue to be a more and more suburbanizing nation. If you lay a demographic track over the highway system of America, you'll see Americans continuing to segregate themselves in $30,000 to $40,000 a year income brackets along the highway systems of America, spending more and more time in the car, more and more time at work, and less time engaged in relationships with people unlike themselves, specifically in relationships aimed at causes and purposes beyond their own family's immediate needs. Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions Clubs, 4-H, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts of America, PTA, every one of those organizations have two things in common. One is they've had a dramatic impact on engagement and concrete results across generations in our nation. And two is they've all declined dramatically in the last 2 generations. And you think to yourself, PTAs, far fewer mothers are showing up for their children's PTA meetings than they did 30 years ago. Do our mothers these days, they just don't care about their kids? They don't want their schools to thrive? And as I know you all have in your head, no, idiot, that's not it. It's because they're working, and in fact, you would be right. My suggestion was wrong, and in fact, the vast majority of women are working every hour they can find, and most of them would love to be at their school's PTA, but first and foremost, they want to feed their children. And I think that's an understandable perspective to have. But it also brings us into a situation where, as I suggested, fewer and fewer of us are engaged in projects beyond our own immediate needs in relationships with people unlike ourselves. And as I argue to college students all over the state, and when I travel to other states, whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think the founding idea, the building block, the core of ethical citizenship, the ability to decide things well on behalf of other human beings, the ability to invest your own time and talent to the betterment of a community or a society, is compassion. And not as a soundbite, as an idea that you as a human being develop or that fails to develop within you that allows you the gift of seeing through someone else's eyes, of being able to feel what it would feel like to lead someone else's life. Now, I think fortunately for us all, I believe it's human nature in us to have compassion if it's sparked properly by putting people in situations where they're exposed to other human beings unlike themselves in real life, vulnerable situations where they can gain insight and return to a safe place to reflect, to read about the structural basis for the situation they just witnessed, and you start to see the flames of compassion sparking. Unfortunately, statistically, it's happening for fewer and fewer Americans, and we see it play out in dramatic ways. I bet you all remember as vividly as I do, it's one of those moments that just continues to haunt your mind. You all remember Katrina coming through. I remember the images after the water broke through the levees and rose. Do you remember the images from news helicopters down? You remember the images of hundreds and then thousands over that 2-day period holding up signs, help, drop food, need water? Thousands and thousands. The semester after that, I took a sociology of religion course at Emory, just for the fun of it. I don't have any, I swear way too much to follow a ministry career. I was over there, and the professor brought a survey, a 3-night national phone survey, that week. It was fascinating to read. Perspectives on all sorts of issues. We're turning through this thing, and we get to a page, and one of the questions is, it described the images I just described to you, from the helicopter down. And it said, did these images sadden you? And one of the students across from me, an African-American PhD student, very tuned in, noticed the breakdown by answers by race. And you look at the black column, it was 99%, which in my mind, I think the 1% didn't hear the question right. Of course they were saddened at the images, 99% of African Americans. 54% of white Americans. Next question, did these images anger you? 99% of African Americans. 52% of white Americans. A little bit of awkward silence in the room at this point. She throws the paper down, crosses her arms, and she says, do you see? This is a racist, cold country. And I remember thinking, yeah, there are racists walking around, but I don't think it's that 48% in that poll. I think that's something different. And I raised my hand reluctantly, sort of, and I started explaining, and the professor added more, and we decided to do more research over the next week and come back, and we came back, and partly through anecdotal, you may have seen some of these conversations on cable news, partly from more structured focus group research in the following week, it became clear what was being measured in that initial poll. It turned out, which I think was an important wake-up call for America at the time, that a considerable majority of white, educated, middle and upper income, suburban, God-fearing Americans saw that scenario unfold, and for many of them, if they were being honest with you, had this in mind. Of course I feel bad for those people. I mean, I don't want to see anyone get hurt. I don't want to see anyone die, but let's be honest. I saw that damn storm rolling through the Gulf of Mexico 4 days earlier. My cousins drove to Birmingham. I have friends in New Orleans. They were in Dallas 2 days before the storm came in. I feel bad for those people, but they could have taken a little bit more personal responsibility, planned ahead, and drove out of town. If someone tell me the factual problem with that, it turns out that millions of Americans, the majority of them working at least 40 hours a week, don't have cars. And I remember walking out of that class thinking, that's so fundamentally a failure of college if we can't have our students leave with a higher education degree in a state like Alabama where at that point they're better educated than 90% of the state without a basic factual awareness of what it is to live like the majority of Americans live, which right now is paycheck to paycheck with negative savings, higher credit card debt than ever before, and for millions of Americans without a car. And without being partisan or name-calling, I feel like those images came to my mind a couple weeks ago with a recently popularized, not just from a presidential candidate, but a recently popularized conception of a lazy 47% who doesn't pay taxes, and it becomes easy for anyone who pays taxes to dismiss them and not have to consider any of the details or the life circumstances, because it certainly is easier to think these are people who don't care, they don't pay, they don't take responsibility for themselves. It's a little bit more shocking when it's a candidate for the presidency of the United States, but I think it also goes wherever you're Republican or Democrat, whether you go back to Reagan's thinking or either one of the Bushes or President Clinton, to acknowledge that 20% of them are seniors on fixed income who have been paying into the system their entire lives, and 60% of the remaining portion are working as many hours as they can find, most of them full-time, receiving the Earned Income Tax Credit, which President Reagan doubled because until 3 months ago, there was bipartisan consensus across the nation that a morally responsible nation supports low-income families based on their willingness to work and make that work pay. Regardless of ideology or who you think should be president, the bare facts of the life lived by the majority of Americans is something that I think is immorally left out of higher education, if it is. And I tell you in this room, thinking about engagement, and it's not enough to lecture about it. I can speak to 600 college students and put on the chalkboard every category that America is 1, 2, or 3 in the industrial